Remember when Trump slapped tariffs on China, promising a flood of manufacturing jobs back to America? Instead, Americans ended up paying $80 billion more in higher prices, while farmers faced devastating export losses. It's like taking a sugar pill. Tariffs might look like a quick fix, but they often make things worse. In the next few minutes, we'll break down the real story behind these promised jobs and explore why protectionism often turns out to be more illusion than solution. Stick around to uncover how even the industries supposedly protected by tariffs ended up losing in the end. The Smoot-Hawley disaster. What if I told you one of America's worst economic decisions started with a promise to save jobs? Back in 1930, Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act with great fanfare. Politicians swore it would protect American workers by slapping massive taxes on over 20,000 imported goods. The idea sounded simple: make foreign products more expensive so people buy American instead. But here's what actually happened. Within 2 years, U.S. exports plummeted by 61%. Other countries retaliated with their own tariffs, targeting key American industries. Canada raised duties on 16 American products, while France and Spain imposed tariffs on cars and wheat, respectively. The result was devastating for American farmers, who saw their overseas markets vanish. Cotton exports dropped 65%, and wheat sales fell by a staggering 80%. Farmers couldn't sell their crops, and many were forced into bankruptcy. The collapse of the export market wasn't just a statistic. It was a crushing blow to families who relied on agriculture to survive. The job losses came fast. Unemployment had been at 7.8% when Smoot-Hawley passed. 2 years later, it hit 23.6%. The tariff, meant to protect manufacturing jobs, had the opposite effect. Factories laid off workers because the tariffs made raw materials more expensive. Automakers paid more for steel, and textile companies paid more for wool. These higher costs were passed along to consumers, who then bought less. The economy spiraled downward in a vicious cycle. These staggering numbers paint a picture of an economy strangled by overburdened industries. The Ford Motor Company laid off 60,000 workers in 1931 alone. U.S. Steel cut wages by 10% and still had to fire workers. Across the economy, about 1,300 businesses failed every month in 1932. The tariff didn't save jobs, it destroyed them on a massive scale. Economists have crunched the numbers. For every job Smoot-Hawley might have saved in protected industries, it killed several others. The higher prices hurt consumers. The retaliatory tariffs hurt exporters. The reduced trade slowed the whole economy. What started as an attempt to help workers ended up making the Great Depression much worse. The steel tariff experiment. Let's look at what happened when the U.S. tried to save steel jobs in 2018. The Trump administration slapped a 25% tariff on steel imports, promising it would bring back American manufacturing jobs. The idea was simple: make foreign steel more expensive so companies would buy American instead. Sounds good in theory, right? Here's what actually happened. First, let's talk about the steel industry itself. The tariffs did give a temporary boost to some domestic steel producers. Prices for U.S. steel went up, and a few companies saw profits rise. While profits soared briefly, the longer-term damage to American jobs proved irreversible. Employment in the steel industry didn't grow. In fact, it declined. By 2019, steel employment was lower than before the tariffs. So much for saving jobs. Now let's talk about the real damage, the downstream industries. Steel isn't just used to make steel. It's used in cars, appliances, construction, and machinery. When steel prices went up, so did costs for all these industries. Construction companies paid more for materials, which meant higher costs for homes and infrastructure projects. Car manufacturers faced higher expenses, which either cut into profits or got passed on to consumers. Imagine a small auto parts supplier in Michigan, already operating on razor-thin margins. When steel prices spiked, they couldn't absorb the costs. Layoffs followed, and eventually the factory shut its doors. This wasn't an isolated case. It was a ripple effect across industries. The numbers don't lie. The U.S. International Trade Commission found that while the steel industry gained $2.8 billion in production, downstream industries lost $3.4 billion. That's a net loss for the economy. For every steel job that might have been saved, studies estimate 10 to 16 jobs were lost in other sectors. Think about that. One job kept at the cost of 16 others. But it gets worse. Some companies didn't just absorb the higher costs, they moved. Manufacturers that relied on steel started shifting production overseas to avoid tariffs. Others found workarounds, like importing partially finished steel products that weren't subject to the same taxes. Instead of bringing jobs back, the tariffs pushed some businesses out of the country. Then there's the consumer impact. Higher steel prices meant more expensive cars, washing machines, and even beer cans. Aluminum got hit with tariffs too. The average family didn't see more jobs, they just saw higher prices. One study estimated the tariffs cost U.S. consumers $68 billion over 2 years. That's real money coming out of people's pockets. So what was the net result? The tariffs didn't bring back steel jobs. They didn't reduce the trade deficit. They didn't make American manufacturing stronger. What they did do was hurt other industries, raise prices, and push some businesses overseas. The promise was jobs, the reality was losses. The China trade war fallout. The 2018 trade war with China was supposed to fix everything. The U.S. slapped tariffs on $370 billion worth of Chinese goods, promising to bring back manufacturing jobs and reduce the trade deficit. Politicians claimed it would force China to play fair and protect American workers. But how did these policies unfold in real communities? First, the tariffs hit American wallets hard. That $80 billion price tag wasn't paid by China. It came straight from U.S. consumers. Everything from washing machines to bicycles got more expensive overnight. A study by the Federal Reserve found tariffs added 0.3% to overall inflation. That might sound small, but for families already living paycheck to paycheck, it was a real burden. Imagine a household trying to stretch their budget, only to find they're paying $1,277 more per year for everyday goods. That's the equivalent of losing a month's worth of groceries or struggling to cover a utility bill during the winter. Farmers felt the sting even more. China retaliated by targeting agricultural exports, and U.S. farmers lost $20 billion in sales almost immediately. Soybean prices crashed 20% in 2018 alone, leaving many farmers with crops they couldn't sell. The government stepped in with $28 billion in farm bailouts, but that was little comfort to families watching generations of hard work unravel. Some farms that had been in operation for over a century were forced to shut down. One farmer in Iowa described it as watching your life's work slip through your fingers, as they struggled to pay off loans with no buyers for their harvest. Manufacturing didn't fare any better. While the tariffs were supposed to boost factory jobs, the opposite happened. Companies using steel and aluminum faced higher costs, forcing layoffs. The auto industry alone lost an estimated 2% of its workforce. One study found the trade war reduced manufacturing employment by 1.4% overall. That's thousands of good-paying jobs gone in industries that were already struggling to compete. For workers in these sectors, the promise of a manufacturing renaissance turned into pink slips and shuttered factories. The numbers tell the real story. Instead of creating jobs, the trade war cost the U.S. economy about 300,000 net jobs. The sectors that lost the most were exactly the ones the tariffs were supposed to help. Manufacturing employment dropped in 2019 for the first time in a decade. Construction jobs slowed as material costs rose. Even the tech sector felt the pinch as computer parts became more expensive. For small businesses, the impact was devastating. Big corporations could absorb the higher costs or move operations overseas, but mom-and-pop manufacturers and retailers had no such options. Many were forced to raise prices, lose customers, or shut their doors entirely. The National Retail Federation estimated the tariffs cost small retailers $3.4 billion in just the first year. China didn't take the tariffs lying down. They strategically targeted industries in politically important states. Soybeans hit Republican farm states. Pork tariffs hurt Iowa. Automobile parts affected Michigan. These weren't random choices. They were precision strikes designed to maximize political pressure. And it worked. The administration had to keep rolling out bailouts to offset the damage, but that didn't undo the long-term harm. China found new suppliers for agricultural goods, leaving U.S. farmers permanently shut out of some markets. The trade deficit didn't improve either. In fact, it grew larger during the trade war years. U.S. companies didn't bring production home. They just shifted to other countries like Vietnam and Mexico. The The global supply chain adapted, but American workers didn't benefit. Meanwhile, consumers continued to pay the price. Higher costs for goods meant less money for other essentials, and wages didn't keep up with the tariff-induced inflation. The Economic Policy Institute found that average workers lost about $400 in annual income due to the trade war's effects. For a family already struggling to make ends meet, that's the difference between staying afloat and falling behind. The stock market reaction showed what investors really thought. Every time new tariffs were announced, markets dropped. When tensions eased, they recovered. Wall Street knew these policies were bad for business. Even companies that supposedly benefited from protection saw their stocks underperform during this period. The promised manufacturing boom never materialized, and the sectors that were supposed to thrive under these policies instead faced higher costs and shrinking profits. Workers paid the highest price. Those who lost jobs faced the immediate impact, but even those who kept their jobs felt the squeeze. Paychecks didn't stretch as far, and the rising cost of living made it harder to save or invest in the future. For many, the trade war wasn't just an abstract policy. It was a daily struggle to make ends meet. After all the pain, what did we gain? Higher prices, lost exports, and fewer jobs. The promised manufacturing renaissance never came. Instead, factories closed. The promised trade balance improvement never happened. Instead, deficits grew. The promised job boom turned into a bust. For the average American, the trade war wasn't a solution, it was a setback. The hidden job killers. Tariffs hurt industries in ways that go far beyond their immediate targets, creating ripple effects that destroy jobs in unexpected places. Picture a stone dropped into a pond. The initial splash is obvious, but the ripples spread far and wide, touching everything in their path. Let's break down how these ripples wreak havoc on employment across the economy. First, tariffs drive up production costs for businesses that rely on imported materials. When steel tariffs made metal more expensive, the impact wasn't limited to automakers. Construction companies paid more for beams and pipes. Appliance manufacturers saw their material costs spike. Even breweries felt the squeeze when aluminum can prices jumped 10% overnight. These businesses faced a tough choice: absorb the higher costs or raise prices. Either way, jobs suffered. Companies that absorbed costs often cut back on hiring or expansion plans. Those that raised prices saw customers buy less, forcing production cuts. A 2019 study found the 2018 to 2019 tariffs caused a 1.8% employment decline in industries dependent on imported inputs, roughly 220,000 jobs lost. The service sector, though seemingly unrelated to tariffs, also takes a hit. When tariffs make goods more expensive, consumers have less money left for services. Think about it. If your washing machine costs $200 more because of tariffs, that's $200 you won't spend at restaurants, movie theaters, or hair salons. Service businesses see fewer customers, lower sales, and eventually staff cuts. During the 2018 trade war, retail and hospitality job growth slowed significantly in tariff-affected areas. One analysis showed service sector employment grew 1.5% slower in counties most exposed to tariffs compared to others. That difference represents thousands of lost jobs in businesses that never imported a single product. Small businesses feel the pinch even more acutely. While big corporations can shift production overseas or negotiate bulk discounts, local machine shops or furniture makers don't have those options. Many small manufacturers operate on razor-thin margins, so a 25% tariff on materials can wipe out their profits entirely. Some try to absorb the costs by cutting back on new hires or employee hours. Others raise prices and lose customers. Either way, jobs disappear. The National Retail Federation estimated small retailers lost $3.4 billion in just the first year of recent tariffs. And when small businesses struggle, they don't just cut jobs. They often close entirely, taking all their employment with them. The ripple effects don't stop there. Every dollar taken out of the economy through tariffs doesn't just vanish. It prevents other economic activity. When a factory worker gets laid off, they stop spending at local businesses. When a restaurant closes, its suppliers lose a customer. One study calculated that every $1 in tariff revenue costs $7 in broader economic damage. This multiplier effect explains why tariff-heavy periods often see slower overall job growth. even in sectors unrelated to trade. The Economic Policy Institute found that average workers lost about $400 in annual income due to the trade war's ripple effects. Some industries face a double whammy. Take agriculture, for example. Farmers not only dealt with retaliatory tariffs that slashed exports, but also paid more for equipment due to steel tariffs. Tractor prices jumped 6% in 2018 alone. Farm equipment manufacturers, already struggling with lower demand from farmers, faced higher steel costs themselves. This cascading damage explains why rural areas often suffer most from trade wars, despite being politically favored for protectionist policies. Creative industries also feel the squeeze. When tariffs made Chinese cameras more expensive, photography studios faced higher equipment costs. Music venues paid more for imported sound systems. Even tech startups struggled as computer parts became pricier. These sectors don't show up in traditional manufacturing employment stats, but they represent real jobs lost to tariffs. The damage to local economies can be devastating. When a major employer cuts jobs due to tariff pressures, the entire community suffers. Local shops lose customers. Property values decline. Tax revenues drop, forcing cuts to schools and services. One analysis found counties most exposed to the 2018 tariffs saw significantly slower wage growth compared to others. These effects linger long after tariffs are lifted, as businesses remain cautious about rehiring. The data paints a clear picture. Tariffs are spectacularly inefficient at creating jobs. For every position saved in protected industries, multiple jobs disappear elsewhere. A 2019 working paper calculated the 2018 to 2019 tariffs generated $51 billion in losses for consumers and import-reliant firms. The same study found no net gain in employment, just a reshuffling of jobs from one sector to another, with an overall loss in economic efficiency. When you factor in retaliatory tariffs and reduced exports, the job picture gets even worse. Some argue tariffs help domestic producers compete, but the numbers tell a different story. Protected industries may see temporary bumps in production, but they rarely sustain long-term employment growth. Meanwhile, their customers, other American businesses, face higher costs that force layoffs. It's like robbing Peter to pay Paul, except Peter was employing more people to begin with. The service sector damage is particularly insidious because it's less visible. When a factory closes, it makes headlines. When a dozen restaurants slowly cut staff hours due to reduced customer spending, nobody connects it to trade policy. Yet these hidden job losses often outweigh any gains in protected sectors. One analysis found service industries accounted for 60% of total tariff-related job losses during recent trade conflicts. Small businesses bear the brunt of these hidden costs. Unlike large corporations, they can't afford teams of lawyers to navigate tariff exemptions. They don't have overseas factories to shift production to. Many simply absorb the losses until they can't anymore. The Small Business Administration reported a significant increase in closures during the 2018 to 2019 trade war, with many owners citing higher material costs as a primary factor. The consumer impact adds another layer of job destruction. When families pay more for basic goods due to tariffs, they cut back elsewhere. That means fewer sales at local businesses, leading to reduced hours or layoffs. Economists estimate recent tariffs cost the average household $1,277 annually, money that would have otherwise supported jobs in various sectors. This slow bleed of consumer spending power does more long-term damage than any temporary boost to protected industries. In the end, tariffs act like a stone dropped into the economy's pond. The initial splash may seem like a win for protected industries, but the ripples spread far and wide, disrupting jobs and livelihoods in ways that are harder to see but impossible to ignore. The retaliation effect. When the U.S. slaps tariffs on other countries, they don't take it lying down, they hit back. Retaliatory tariffs are like economic boomerangs. You throw one out, and it comes right back at you. Here's how it works. Country A raises taxes on Country B's imports, so Country B responds by taxing Country A's exports. It's a trade war, and nobody wins. The moment the U.S. imposed steel and aluminum tariffs in 2018, Canada and Mexico retaliated with tariffs on $15 billion worth of U.S. goods. Steel, pork, yogurt, key exports were suddenly under fire. China followed suit, targeting American farmers with tariffs on soybeans, pork, and other agricultural products. The result: U.S. farm exports to China plummeted by $20 billion in just 1 year. Farmers bore the brunt of the fallout. Soybean prices dropped 20% almost overnight. Pork producers lost access to their biggest market. Dairy farmers watched as their products sat unsold. The government stepped in with $28 billion in farm bailouts, essentially paying farmers to offset a problem the tariffs created. But bailouts don't bring back lost customers. Once trade relationships break down, they're incredibly hard to rebuild. Take one Illinois soybean farmer, for example. He saw his crop prices collapse and had to sell off equipment just to stay afloat. Stories like his played out across the country. It wasn't just agriculture. Retaliatory tariffs hit manufacturing hard, especially in states that depended on exports. Take Wisconsin, where Harley-Davidson faced higher costs in Europe after the EU retaliated. Instead of absorbing the extra expenses, they shifted some production overseas, leading to fewer jobs in the U.S. Similar stories unfolded nationwide. The numbers don't lie. In 2019 alone, retaliatory tariffs cost the U.S. 75,000 manufacturing jobs. Factories slowed production. Some closed entirely. The Midwest, already struggling with industrial decline, got hit hardest. States like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, the very places tariffs were supposed to help, saw job losses pile up. Let that sink in: 75,000 jobs gone in a single year. Regional economies took a beating. Small towns reliant on a single industry, like pork processing in Iowa or soybean farming in Illinois, faced economic disaster. When exports dry up, local businesses suffer too. Equipment dealers sell fewer tractors. Restaurants see fewer customers. Tax revenues drop, forcing cuts to schools and infrastructure. It's a downward spiral. The damage wasn't limited to traditional industries. Advanced manufacturing, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, high-tech equipment also got caught in the crossfire. These sectors rely on global supply chains. When tariffs make imported components more expensive, production costs rise. That makes U.S. goods less competitive overseas. Companies either eat the costs and cut jobs or lose market share. Retaliation isn't random. Countries strategically target industries that hurt the most politically. China didn't just tax soybeans. They targeted farm states that voted for the politicians pushing tariffs. The EU went after bourbon, hitting Kentucky, and motorcycles, hitting Wisconsin. These weren't accidents. They were precision strikes designed to maximize political pain. The ripple effects spread far beyond the factory floor. When manufacturing jobs disappear, service sector jobs follow. Truck drivers haul fewer goods. Restaurants near factories lose lunch crowds. Local retailers see sales drop. One study found that for every manufacturing job lost to tariffs, another 1.5 jobs vanished elsewhere in the economy. Some companies tried to adapt by shifting supply chains. Instead of bringing production back to the U.S., many moved operations to other countries, Vietnam, Mexico, Thailand, anywhere to avoid tariffs. That didn't help American workers. It just meant the jobs went somewhere else, not home. The auto industry got squeezed from all sides. Steel tariffs raised material costs. Retaliatory tariffs made U.S.-made cars more expensive overseas. The result? Layoffs, plant closures, slower growth. By 2019, auto manufacturing employment was shrinking for the first time in years. Small manufacturers had it worst. Big corporations could absorb higher costs or move production. But small shops making specialized parts? They had no escape. Many folded under the pressure. Others cut staff to survive. The ones that made it had to raise prices, making their products less competitive. Export-dependent industries got hammered. The U.S. is the world's second-largest goods exporter, selling everything from airplanes to medical equipment overseas. When other countries tax those goods, sales drop. That means fewer jobs here. In 2019, U.S. export growth stalled, the worst performance in a decade. The damage wasn't temporary. Even after tariffs were lifted, some markets never fully recovered. Chinese buyers found new soybean suppliers in Brazil. European customers got used to buying bourbon from other countries. Once you lose a customer, winning them back is twice as hard. Economists call this deadweight loss, the economic damage that never gets recouped. Workers who lose jobs don't always find new ones at the same pay. Businesses that close don't always reopen. The 2018 to 2019 trade war left permanent scars on some industries. The worst part, retaliatory tariffs are entirely predictable. Every time the US starts a trade war, other countries retaliate. History shows this, from the Smoot-Hawley disaster in the 1930s to the steel tariffs of the 2000s. Yet politicians keep pretending this time will be different. The data says otherwise. A study by the Federal Reserve found the 2018 to 2019 tariffs reduced manufacturing employment and investment. Another analysis showed that for every job, the price you pay. Here's how tariffs make everything more expensive. When the government slaps a tax on imports, businesses don't absorb that cost. They pass it directly to you. This is called the pass-through effect, and it means higher prices at the checkout line. For example, if a company pays 25% more for steel, that extra cost gets built into the price of cars, appliances, and construction materials. Suddenly, that new washing machine or home renovation just got a lot pricier. The numbers tell the story. During the 2018 to 2019 trade war, everyday products saw significant price jumps. Washing machines became 12% more expensive. Bicycles went up 17%. Even simple items like nails and aluminum foil cost more. The Federal Reserve found tariffs added 0.3% to overall inflation, enough to squeeze family budgets. And it wasn't just finished goods. Raw materials like steel and lumber also became pricier, driving up costs for home builders, manufacturers, and small businesses. That extra cost is a silent toll on everyday living, but it doesn't hit everyone equally. Low-income families felt the brunt of it. When prices rise, everyone notices, but the pain isn't evenly distributed. A study by the Budget Lab at Yale found households at the bottom of the income ladder lost 2.5 times more disposable income than the wealthiest families. Why? Because lower-income households spend a larger share of their paychecks on essentials like food, clothing, and household goods, the very things tariffs made more expensive. For families already stretching every dollar, even small price hikes can force tough choices between groceries, rent, or medical bills. The damage doesn't stop at higher prices. Tariffs also shrink the variety of goods available. Some imports become so expensive that stores stop carrying them altogether. Christopher Meissner, an economics professor at UC Davis, explains, consumers are likely to face higher prices and a reduced selection of goods because some imports become too expensive to bring into the country. Fewer options on shelves mean less competition to keep prices in check, leaving consumers with fewer affordable choices. Let's break it down further. The Budget Lab at Yale projected the recent tariffs would increase U.S. prices by 2.3%, costing the average household $3,800. Other estimates put the annual cost at $1,277 per family. Either way, that's real money coming out of people's pockets. And it's not a one-time hit. Tariffs keep costing you month after month, year after year. Every trip to the grocery store, every car repair, every home improvement project gets more expensive. The auto industry is a prime example of how these costs ripple through the economy. Tariffs on steel and aluminum added hundreds of dollars to the cost of building a single car. Those costs were passed on to buyers, making new vehicles less affordable. But it didn't stop there. Repair shops paid more for parts. Rental companies faced higher fleet costs. Even rideshare drivers felt the pinch when maintenance bills went up. The ripple effects spread through the entire economy, touching nearly every aspect of daily life. Small businesses were hit especially hard. Unlike big corporations, they can't negotiate bulk discounts or shift production overseas. A local bike shop paying 25% more for imported helmets might have to raise prices, lose customers, or even close down. The National Retail Federation estimated small retailers lost $3.4 billion in just the first year of tariffs. That's not just bad for business owners. It's bad for workers and communities that depend on those jobs. Even services weren't spared. Restaurants paid more for kitchen equipment. Landscapers faced higher tool costs. Hair salons saw prices rise for scissors, chairs, and styling products. These businesses either absorbed the costs, cutting into profits and wages, or passed them on to customers. Either way, the economy lost. Some industries faced a double whammy. Farmers paid more for tractors and equipment due to steel tariffs, while also losing export markets to retaliatory tariffs. Construction companies dealt with pricier materials, while homebuyers struggled with higher mortgage rates. These compounding effects made entire sectors less competitive, creating a drag on economic growth. Tariffs act like a hidden tax on consumers, quietly eating away at household budgets. The Trump administration's trade policies were projected to raise the effective tariff rate from 1.7% in 2016 to as high as 17%, the highest level since the 1930s. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned these tariffs were larger than expected, adding that the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. The impact on paychecks was undeniable. Wages didn't keep up with tariff-driven inflation, meaning workers effectively took a pay cut. The Economic Policy Institute found average workers lost about $400 in annual income due to the trade war's effects. For families living paycheck to paycheck, that's a month of groceries or a utility bill they can't pay. The worst part, these costs were entirely predictable. Economists have known for decades that tariffs raise consumer prices. The only debate is by how much. The recent trade wars proved it again. When you tax imports, consumers foot the bill. The average family paid $1,277 more annually because of tariffs. Money that could have gone to savings, education, or just keeping up with rising rents. The winners and losers. Let's break down who actually wins and loses when tariffs get imposed. On the surface, tariffs are sold as job savers, protecting American workers from foreign competition. But the reality is far messier. A small group of companies and industries benefit, while everyone else pays the price. Economists call this concentrated benefits versus diffuse costs. Think of it like a lottery. A few winners walk away with a jackpot, while the rest of us chip in for the ticket without realizing how much we've spent. Take the 2018 steel tariffs. A handful of steel companies saw profits jump. U.S. steel stock price climbed 14% in the months after the tariffs were announced. Nucor, another major producer, saw earnings rise by 35%. But while these companies celebrated, thousands of other businesses were getting hammered. Construction firms paid more for materials. Auto manufacturers faced higher costs. Even beer can makers got squeezed by pricier aluminum. The United States International Trade Commission found the steel industry gained $2.8 billion in production, but downstream industries lost $3.4 billion. That's a net loss for the economy, even before factoring in the jobs lost. The winners are always a small club. In the case of steel, just 5 companies accounted for over 60% of domestic production. Those firms lobbied hard for tariffs and reaped the rewards. Meanwhile, the losers? That list includes pretty much everyone else. Farmers lost export markets. Manufacturers paid more for inputs. Consumers faced higher prices. But because those costs are spread across millions of people, no single group feels the full weight or has the same incentive to fight back. That's why tariffs stick around. The winners lobby to keep them, while the losers don't even realize they're paying. Even workers in protected industries don't always come out ahead. The 2018 washing machine tariffs were supposed to create jobs, and they did, about 1,800 of them. But consumers paid $1.5 billion more for washers and dryers. That's $815,000 per job created. Did those workers see anywhere near that kind of pay bump? Not even close. Most factory jobs pay $40,000 to $60,000 a year. The rest of that money went to corporate profits and higher costs across the supply chain. The stock market tells the real story. Companies that benefit from tariffs often see short-term pops in their share prices. But those gains rarely last. Over time, protected industries become less competitive. They don't have to innovate or cut costs because the government is shielding them from competition. Meanwhile, companies that rely on imports see their margins shrink. Their stocks underperform. The whole economy becomes less efficient. A study by the Federal Reserve found the 2018 to 2019 tariffs reduced manufacturing investment by 1.9%. Hardly a recipe for long-term job growth. Tariffs don't create wealth, they just move it around. When the government taxes imports, it forces consumers and businesses to pay more for goods. That extra money doesn't disappear. It goes to the protected industries. But the losses outweigh the gains. The USIC found that for every dollar steel producers gained from tariffs, downstream industries lost $1.20. That's a net drain on the economy. And it's not just about money, it's about jobs too. For every job saved by tariffs, 5 to 20 others are lost elsewhere in the economy. Some of those losses are direct, like factory workers laid off because their company can't afford pricier materials. Others are indirect, like restaurant staff who lose hours when customers have less to spend. Either way, the math is clear. Tariffs destroy far more jobs than they create. The trade deficit myth is another smokescreen. Politicians love to claim tariffs will reduce trade imbalances. But the data says otherwise. When the U.S. slapped tariffs on China, imports from China fell, but imports from Mexico, Korea, and Taiwan rose. The overall trade deficit barely budged. Why? Because tariffs don't address the root causes of trade imbalances. They just shuffle the deck, moving production from one country to another without fixing anything. Small businesses get crushed in this system. Big corporations can lobby for exemptions or shift production overseas. But your local machine shop or appliance store, they're stuck paying the higher prices. Many small manufacturers operate on razor-thin margins. A 25% tariff on materials can wipe out their profits entirely. Some try to absorb the costs at first, cutting back on new hires or employee hours. Others raise prices and lose customers. Either way, jobs disappear. The service sector doesn't escape unscathed either. When tariffs make goods more expensive, consumers have less to spend on services. Restaurants see fewer customers. Hair salons book fewer appointments. Movie theaters sell fewer tickets. These businesses don't import anything, but they still suffer. One analysis found service sector employment grew 1.5% slower in counties most exposed to tariffs. That's thousands of jobs lost in industries that never asked for protection. The worst part, the benefits are temporary. Protected industries often see a short-term boost, but it doesn't last. Without competition, they become less efficient. Costs stay high. Quality stagnates. Meanwhile, the rest of the economy pays the price indefinitely. The 2018 to 2019 tariffs were supposed to be temporary, but many are still in place today. Once tariffs exist, they're hard to remove, even when they're clearly not working. The numbers don't lie. The Trump administration's tariffs were projected to raise the average tariff rate from 1.7% to as high as 17%, the highest level since the 1930s. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned these tariffs would lead to higher inflation and slower growth. He was right. The economy paid the price, while a handful of companies cashed in. At the end of the day, tariffs don't just shuffle money around, they shuffle opportunity, jobs, and growth. The winners are few, the losers are many, and the costs are everywhere. Whether it's the price of a car, a can of beer, or a haircut, we all feel the pinch. And the worst part, most of us don't even realize we're paying. The political calculus. Here's why bad trade policy keeps coming back. The political game around tariffs is rigged in favor of short-term wins over long-term sense. Politicians love tariffs because they can point to specific factories or farms and say, "Look, we saved these jobs." What they don't mention are the thousands of other jobs quietly disappearing across the economy. The visibility problem is key. When a steel plant stays open because of tariffs, it's easy to photograph and put in campaign ads. But when higher steel prices force an auto parts supplier to lay off workers 6 states away, nobody connects the dots. The benefits are concentrated and obvious. The costs are scattered and invisible. Election cycles make this worse. Tariff announcements often come right before votes, generating headlines and photo ops when politicians need them most. For example, the Section 232 steel tariffs were announced just before the 2018 midterms, and the China trade war escalated as the 2020 campaign heated up. These moves are timed for maximum political impact. By the time the economic damage becomes clear, the election is over, and the politicians have moved on. Lobbying keeps the system going. A few powerful industries, steel, aluminum, solar panels, spend millions pushing for protection. They've got teams of lawyers and lobbyists in Washington. Meanwhile, the millions of consumers and small businesses paying the price? They're not organized. There's no anti-tariff coalition, with matching jackets and a Capitol Hill office. This imbalance ensures that the voices of those hurt by tariffs are drowned out. The media plays a role in amplifying this imbalance. Tariff announcements get 3 times more coverage than their actual economic impacts. Why? Because President slaps tariffs on China makes a better headline than complex trade policy has mixed results. The spectacle outweighs the substance every time. This media frenzy reinforces the lobbying efforts, creating a feedback loop where dramatic announcements dominate the narrative, while the real costs remain hidden. Take the 2018 to 2019 trade wars as an example. The Trump administration touted tariffs as tough negotiation tactics, and the media covered every announcement like a boxing match. Meanwhile, the $80 billion cost to consumers barely made the news. Farmers received $28 billion in bailouts, but the stories focused on saving them, not why they needed saving in the first place. The connection between tariffs and economic pain was buried under layers of spin. The political math is brutal. For every steelworker who keeps their job thanks to tariffs, there are 16 other workers losing theirs. But the steelworkers' story gets told. The other 16? They're spread across different industries, different states, and different news cycles. Politicians aren't stupid. They know which side of that equation gets them reelected. And the industries benefiting from tariffs know it too. Steel companies that profit from protection donate to campaigns, host factory tours for politicians, and provide perfect backdrops for jobs-saved press conferences. Meanwhile, the small manufacturers going under because of higher steel costs? They don't have time. For politics, they're too busy trying to survive. The human cost of these policies is often invisible, but it's devastating. Take a small Midwestern town reliant on a local machine shop. When tariffs drive up the cost of raw materials, that shop struggles to compete. Orders dry up, layoffs begin, and soon the ripple effects hit the diner down the street, the local hardware store, and the community as a whole. These stories rarely make headlines, but they're happening all over the country. The timing of tariff decisions is rarely accidental. Major announcements are carefully planned to align with political needs. For instance, the recent solar panel tariffs coincided with Democrats seeking union support. These are not coincidences. They're calculated moves designed to maximize political gain. And when the policies backfire, politicians have ready scapegoats. Lost manufacturing jobs? Blame automation. Higher prices? Blame corporate greed. Failed farms? Blame the weather. A study found that less than 5% of news coverage about trade war job losses mentioned tariffs as the cause. The connection gets buried, and the cycle continues. Small businesses are among the hardest hit. Big corporations can hire lobbyists to secure exemptions or shift supply chains overseas. But the local machine shop or appliance store, they just pay the higher costs until they can't anymore. The National Federation of Independent Business found that 25% of small firms reported significant cost increases from tariffs. These businesses don't have the resources to adapt, and many are forced to close their doors. The service sector suffers quietly too. When tariffs make goods more expensive, people spend less at restaurants, salons, and movie theaters. These businesses don't import anything, but they still lose customers. One analysis found service job growth slowed by 1.5% in tariff-heavy areas. That's thousands of lost paychecks nobody connects to trade policy. The numbers tell the real story. While politicians were bragging about saving steel jobs, manufacturing employment actually declined in 2019. The trade deficit they promised to fix? It grew larger. The economic growth they predicted? It slowed down. But none of that stopped the tariff train. The political return on investment is all about perception. Tariff announcements generate massive media coverage compared to their actual impacts. For politicians, that's gold, all the credit for doing something, with the costs coming later when nobody's looking. The cycle keeps repeating because the incentives are broken. Politicians get rewarded for visible actions, not actual results. Industries that benefit from protection are organized and loud. The millions who pay the price are scattered and quiet. Until that changes, bad trade policy will keep coming back. Better solutions exist. Tariffs might get all the political attention, but there are better ways to help workers. The problem is, these alternatives don't make for flashy headlines or factory photo ops. They require real work and long-term thinking. 2 things politicians often avoid. But if we're serious about protecting jobs without wrecking the economy, here's what actually works. First up, wage subsidies. These are direct payments to employers to keep workers on payroll or hire new ones. Unlike tariffs, which cost consumers billions to save a handful of jobs, wage subsidies target the help exactly where it's needed. For example, the 2018 washing machine tariffs saved about 1,800 jobs, at a staggering cost of $800,000 per job to consumers. A wage subsidy could have achieved the same result for a fraction of the price. Research shows direct wage subsidies cost just 1/10 of tariffs per job saved. As noted by studies, this approach isn't just more efficient, it's smarter policy that delivers real results. What makes wage subsidies so effective is their precision. Tariffs raise prices for everyone, distorting the entire economy. Wage subsidies, on the other hand, help specific workers without burdening consumers or other industries. Think of them as a targeted lifeline for the labor market, addressing the problem without creating new ones. Countries like Germany have used them successfully for decades to maintain manufacturing jobs during economic shifts, proving their long-term viability. Moving from direct support to building for the future, retraining programs are another powerful tool. When jobs disappear due to trade or technology, the answer isn't to prop up dying industries. It's to prepare workers for what's next. The Trade Adjustment Assistance, TAA, program is a prime example. It provides job training, income support, and relocation assistance to workers displaced by trade. One study found participants who completed TAA training saw their earnings rise 15% compared to those who didn't. That's meaningful, lasting help, not just a temporary band-aid. Some of the most effective retraining programs focus on high-growth sectors. In Kentucky, the Tech Hire program trained displaced coal miners for IT jobs, with 80% landing positions paying $20 per hour or more. Similarly, in Michigan, auto workers transitioned to renewable energy jobs through targeted apprenticeships. These programs succeed because they align workers' skills with actual market demand, rather than clinging to outdated industries. It's a forward-looking approach that equips workers for sustainable careers. Next, let's talk infrastructure investment. Unlike tariffs, which merely shuffle jobs around, building roads, bridges, and broadband creates entirely new employment opportunities. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates every $1 billion in infrastructure spending creates 13,000 jobs. And these aren't just temporary gigs, they're careers in construction, engineering, and maintenance. Plus, better infrastructure boosts productivity across the entire economy. It's a win-win that policymakers often overlook. The key advantage of infrastructure jobs? They can't be outsourced. You can't build a bridge in Vietnam and ship it to Ohio. This makes infrastructure spending uniquely effective, with a jobs multiplier of 1.5, meaning every direct hire leads to another half job elsewhere in the economy. Compare that to tariffs, where every saved job often results in several others being lost. The math is clear. Infrastructure investment delivers far more bang for the buck. Another promising strategy is tax reform. The current system discourages investment through complex depreciation rules. A destination-based cash flow tax, DBCFT, could fix this by allowing businesses to immediately deduct capital investments. This isn't just a theoretical idea, it's been extensively modeled. As noted by the Tax Foundation, a DBCFT could boost GDP by 9% and wages by 7% over a decade. That's how you make American workers competitive, by encouraging growth, not by walling off the economy. The DBCFT also includes a smart feature, border adjustments. Exports wouldn't be taxed, while imports wouldn't get deductions. This levels the playing field for domestic production without resorting to blunt force tariffs. When Britain implemented a similar policy in 2012, manufacturing investment jumped 30% in just 3 years. It's a clear example of how targeted tax reform can drive real economic gains. Here's the kicker. All these alternatives are cheaper than tariffs. The 2018 to 2019 trade wars alone cost $80 billion in higher consumer prices. For that money, we could have funded wage subsidies for every displaced manufacturing worker and still had billions left over. Or retrained 2 million workers at $4,000 each. Or rebuilt half our crumbling bridges. Instead, we got higher prices and fewer jobs, a lose-lose scenario. The political resistance to these solutions tells you everything. Wage subsidies don't make for catchy campaign slogans. Retraining programs take years to show results. Infrastructure projects require bipartisan cooperation. Tariffs, on the other hand, offer instant gratification, even if the long-term consequences are disastrous. It's the difference between taking your medicine and opting for a quick sugar rush. Some states, however, are proving these alternatives work. In Georgia, the Quick Start program partners with companies to train workers for specific high-demand jobs. Over 90% of participants get hired, at no cost to them. In Pennsylvania, a manufacturing apprenticeship program cut worker turnover by 60% while raising wages. These aren't theoretical models. They're real programs creating real jobs right now. The data doesn't lie. A study of 151 countries over 50 years found tariffs consistently reduce productivity and incomes. Meanwhile, wage subsidies and retraining programs have been shown to increase earnings without the collateral damage. It's not that we don't know what works. It's that what works isn't politically convenient. The most frustrating part? We've seen this play out before. The 2002 steel tariffs were supposed to save jobs. Instead, 200,000 workers in steel-using industries lost theirs, at a cost of $400,000 per saved job. The government had to implement emergency retraining programs to clean up the mess. In the end, we paid twice, first for the tariffs, then for the solution. If we want to protect workers and grow the economy, the path forward is clear. Wage subsidies, retraining, infrastructure investment, and tax reform aren't just better alternatives, they're proven strategies. The question is whether we're willing to embrace them. Here's the hard truth. Tariffs don't save jobs, they just shift the pain. When politicians talk about saving jobs, the numbers tell a harsher story. The 2018 to 2019 tariffs cost the U.S. economy $51 billion and thousands of jobs. A few industries might benefit, but everyone else pays through higher prices and lost opportunities. The real solutions, wage subsidies, retraining, infrastructure, aren't flashy, but they work without wrecking the economy. What's your take? Have tariffs impacted you or your community?